If you think Justin's a beautiful man, like, subscribe, comment below, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a moment of this man's beauty. Justin,
Henry.
we are on chapter 12.
We made it. We're now entering the second portion of the book of Genesis, where we go through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So,
when you say second portion, what was the first portion about?
First portion, chapters 1 through 11, the origins kind of how things came to be, of why, kind of setting the stage for why the world is the way it is. And then now Genesis 12 and on is showing, Moses is showing Israel where they came from out of all those origins.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very interesting. The second half, chapters 1 through 11, is what we just talked about. Abram's introduced at the very end of chapter 11. And in chapter 12, we get to learn all about Abram. I could not be more excited about this. Abram, he's a big deal.
He is a big deal.
He's a really big deal. I'm pretty sure that there's a song about Abram.
Yeah, there is.
Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham, and I am one, and so are you. So something, something.
You know it way better than me.
To be honest, I don't know how I remember that. But
It's good.
I don't even know how biblically accurate that song is, because are we really sons of Abraham?
Yeah, we have been grafted in, as Paul says in the New Testament.
But we might not be, technically speaking, genetically speaking.
No. We're probably not genetically speaking. We're probably sons of the lineage of Japheth instead of Shem. Shem appears to be the father of the Semitic people, right? So, and so I don't know what our lineage is on down, but I mean, if we're assuming like European descent or whatever in some facet, that would be Japheth.
And
But
it's likely a mixture, right? I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of mixtures, and so, but I would just say that, like, no matter what, Paul said that the church is grafted in, right? So we are sons and daughters by faith.
At
The
the
church
very
is
least, we all trace back to Noah and his wife.
you
So
know
you're
it.
my long lost cousin from that perspective.
Yep,
And if we go even further back, right, we're all
bros. Anyway.
everyone, I don't care who you are, we're bros.
We're bros.
So thank you, bros, lady and man bros, for
Lady
joining
and
us today. And we are going to be digging into chapter 12. I cannot wait to get through this chapter. Actually, I want it to last forever. That's the perfect truth. I don't even want to speed through it. So, but let's get this ball rolling. I'm going to start with Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Abram journeys to Egypt. So before we even get into this, I want to read this, but Abram right now is actually in Haran, which is in the land of Canaan, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Then he's going to southwest into Egypt.
Hmm.
So, chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed.
I think there's some stuff to talk about there.
definitely think so. I mean, what in the world is God talking about here?
Yeah, so the land which I will show you, so that's the land of Canaan. I will make you a great nation. So the people, the descendants of Abraham, are going to be the Hebrew people, the Israelites, and so that's going to be the nation of Israel. Um, and it says, "I will make your name great." And so obviously, he's the father of the Israelites, the father of the Hebrew people. And so we see here, and so you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And so we kind of see this thing that um, throughout history, there have been different scholars who have traced this, and so this is something that you can be up to your own discernment. But certain scholars have talked about that nations who have aligned themselves with Israel have received blessing, and nations who have been enemies of Israel have had a lot of struggles and have received some hardships.
Mm,
And so there are scholars that believe that this is very apparent today, and that this is observable today. Now obviously that goes with, this is connected to your just theological interpretation and how you interpret the Bible overall, and things like that. But and it says here, though, at the end of verse 3, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed.
mm,
And so here is where we see, I believe this is tied to the Messiah. Uh, and so, like, all the families of the earth. So we kind of see this idea that God has this very wide evangelistic focus, just in the very beginning, right? I mean, we've already seen that, but it's kind of reiterated here that God's evangelistic focus is not, he uses Israel. We talked about this as a mediator for him, as Israel's responsibility, right, is to show God's light, reveal God's light, reveal who God is. And so we see that God's ultimate, this fits well with kind of the New Testament about, like, God loving the world, right, and loving people from every tribe, tongue, and nation, and just kind of what he's doing, to have restored fellowship with them. And so we see this here, and I believe this is connected to, the Messiah once again, that Jesus is going to, his death on the cross, and what that means for all of us.
absolutely. And let me just re-emphasize one thing at the beginning of this. Go forth from your country. There's a command here. God's giving Abram a command to go forth from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house to a land which I will show you. God's asking quite a bit from Abram here. Hey, leave all your relatives, leave your father's house. And this isn't like today, right, where you can like jump on a plane and, go back and visit your family, or, get on Skype or some type of video conferencing system so that you can still stay in touch with everybody. That's not what we're talking about here. Whenever you left to a new land, there's a good chance you're never going to see your family ever again.
Yeah.
That's a pretty tough ask, that God's asking of Abram at this point. And so, um, however, we'll get to see how this plays out.
Yes, I want to comment real quick on something you said.
Okay.
So in Hebrews 11, uh, verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise, in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So yeah, I feel like that kind of reiterates and parallels what you were saying about how this requires faith. So we're going to talk more about that, though. Let's pick up in verse 4. So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out from the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain of on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev.
Love it. Love it. So God commands Abram to do something in verse 1. And what do you see Abram do? Verse 4. So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Lot is Abraham's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn about Lot and his relationship with Abram in chapter 11.
And I don't know, though, I think that God, when he said, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to land. So I think that God still wanted Abram to maybe go separate from Lot. And so we'll kind of see that play out later on. But either way, we see a lot of faithfulness by Abraham here.
And the Lord appeared to Abram and said to your descendants, I will give this land. This is at the beginning of verse 7. Justin, is there any significance? Is this 7a? We'll call it 7a. Does this have any significance in the Bible?
I think, it definitely does. I would say that this is kind of the beginning of where God is giving the boundaries of Israel. And so we see later on, I believe it's in chapter 15. I don't remember exactly, but we're going to find it. Later on, we see that Abraham is given specific boundaries, right? Of like, hey, your eastern boundary is going to be here, your western boundary here, northern boundary here, southern boundary here. And so God's going to map out the boundaries that he wants to give the tribes of Israel. And that's going to be discussed again in the book of Joshua. Once again, I'm commenting on a theological perspective because one of the views that I have about the boundaries and the promises of Israel is my biblical interpretation. But if you don't have this interpretation, it's not an essential thing. And so I believe, though, that we see in the Old Testament that Israel never received the full boundaries that God had assigned to them. They received their biggest boundaries when King Solomon was reigning. But so I believe Jesus Christ is coming back to reign 1,000-year kingdom to where Israel will have the full boundaries. But not only that, Christ is going to rule the whole world, but he's going to rule from the capital of the world, which will be Israel, from Jerusalem specifically, and they will have their full boundaries as far as like these specific tribes will actually occupy the full area that they were originally intended to live in. And so that's what I believe one of the significances of this verse is. Now, there are other people who interpret the Bible differently than I do. And so that they view these promises as now being spiritualized because we're in the church age. And so they would see these verses as having different significance than I do. Here's the thing. So this is part of the Abrahamic covenant. In the past, we talked about the Noahic covenant. This is part of the Abrahamic covenant. Now, I don't want to get ahead, but in a very close upcoming chapter, we're going to see that God makes a treaty with Abram that I'm going to go into more detail about then. And so with that, this is an unconditional promise. Okay, you will receive this land at some point to the Hebrew people. You will. But then when we get into Exodus, we see with the Mosaic covenant. Okay, now a lot of these covenants, I'm going to need to explain more, but a lot of these covenants stack on top of each other. So the Noahic covenant, the Mosaic covenant conveniently stacks on top, or the Abrahamic covenant. Then the Mosaic covenant conveniently stacks on top of the Abrahamic covenant. And then we have the new covenant. There are areas where it kind of like we're no longer under the Mosaic covenant. Now God's moral law, God's moral boundaries have always been the same. So it's not like it's okay to sin now, and it wasn't before. It's never okay to sin. But what I'm trying to get at with all this is that the Abrahamic covenant said, this is your land. Okay, this will be your land. But the Mosaic covenant that stacks on top of that, Deuteronomy fleshes this out about the blessings and the curses, right? And so, will you get to enjoy the land? Will you get to receive the whole land? That's the condition. If you obey the Mosaic covenant, you will be blessed and receive the whole land right now. If you don't, you will be cursed and you won't receive the whole land right now, and you won't enjoy the land. And so we're going to see that. Once again, I don't want to get wrapped up into everything, but anyway, that is something interesting that's going on with the covenant, and that all ties into this verse from my biblical view.
Got it. And you immediately see Abram building an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. So God is appearing to Abram, excuse me.
Yeah, so definitely. Or like later on, we're going to see how the God in three persons came to sit and eat with Abram. So we have, in the Old Testament, or just in the Bible, when we talk about God appearing, like it's called a theophany, which means it's a physical manifestation of God. And so
What was that word?
theophany.
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 And
It's
it's
a
a physical
manifestation of God.
manifestation of God,
Right. And so
where
we
you can
see,
see God with your own eyes.
well, yes, but you can see God in the sense the way he chose to physically manifest himself, right? Because God is a spiritual being, but God chooses to manifest himself physically, however that might be. And it can be different. It appears different in different books of the Bible, right?
Right.
And so we see here, though, that Abram heard an audible voice from God. Like he heard audible voices. And it seems that both Abram and Moses had similar experiences where they straight up heard audible voices and then straight up saw physical manifestations of God, or at least portions of it, at least the way God presented himself, because later on, um, God told Moses, no man can see me and live. And so he'll let you see, God will let you see him to a degree. Right. And so anyway, that's what God did here with Abram as well.
Very cool. Anything else on that section, or do you want to move on to verse 10?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. I think you covered a lot of good stuff, man. Yeah.
Verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. It came about when he came near to Egypt that he said to Sarai his wife, "See now, I know that you are a beautiful woman, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you." It came about when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Therefore he treated Abram well for her sake, and gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. Whoa.
Yep.
Abram's not telling the truth in this little section.
Yeah, there's a couple things going on in this section. One is that there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt. So God didn't call Abram to Egypt, he called Abram to Canaan. So obviously, it seems logical why one would want to leave an area where there's a famine and go to another area where there's not a famine. I don't know that Abram should have done this, though. There are some problems that happen in Egypt. The story of Abram, though, it shows God's grace, right? Because God is this. God tells Abram, "I'll make your name great. Great. I will, have your descendants." Like all these things, and he put Abraham in the faith chapter, but we see all these screw ups that Abram does, and it just shows God's grace of saying, "Hey, look, He wants us to have faith in Him, but He's not trying to count all the times we screw up against us. He's asking us to move forward in faith, and if we do that, He's going to reward us, right? There are rewards, and it's not like, well, you screwed up here, so never mind. God is very gracious, and we see this, and Abram. This is not the last mistake we're going to read by Abram. Okay.
Agreed. So what you're saying is from the very first verse in the section, there was a famine in the land. It appears that worried Abram, right? Because when you don't eat, you die. So Abram went down to Egypt, which I suspect he thought was a logical move because there was more food in that area so that he could essentially eat. And I would just say this logic is definitely a ability that God gave us, but I would never put logic over a clear commandment from God because then you're asking for trouble. And listen, for tens, hundreds, thousands of years, man has made decisions based on logic that ultimately blew up in their face. And we don't have to call out whole societies. I think there's been decisions that I've made as well that were based on logic that were not the best decision ultimately. And if I would have had more faith, then I think would have been a much, much better result. And what you've just described is a negative result from Abram relying upon his own logic. There was a lot of negative results that came from this decision that he makes here.
Right, and maybe, like I said, I want to be careful. There may be differing views on this, and so I'm not trying to, make this an essential or clear cut. But he knows, hey, I'm kind of traveling outside of God's will, and so maybe that contributes to him lying about who his wife is, or lying about his relationship with his wife, because maybe he's thinking, hey, I don't have God's protection here because He didn't call me to Egypt, so maybe I need to lie here. Maybe this is something. So here's the thing. Well, once again, these are. It's difficult for me to say. I'm still learning about Abram's life. All these verses. But I guess that's where I'm at right now. I think it's worth considering.
Right. And I definitely would agree that um, Abram in this region, while there's food there, he's nervous for his own safety and because of how beautiful his wife was. And not only did Abram think that his wife was beautiful, but the Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. So this woman wasn't just beautiful to Abram. This woman was so beautiful. This woman was so beautiful that she was brought to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the region. And I just I can imagine if she was that beautiful, I imagine if I was Abram, I'd be a little nervous as well, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought up her beauty. I think well, one of the things, well, one of the conversations within the philosophy or art world is beauty objective or subjective? And I think that if you've put your faith in Christ, if you believe in the Bible, then you should believe that beauty is objective. And if you believe in a naturalistic, atheistic worldview, I think it would be consistent with your worldview for you to say that beauty is subjective. Now, within the Christian worldview, beauty can be both objective and subjective, right? Because that objective beauty is still the level of it can still be somewhat subjective. But the point is that God created objective beauty, and that I think that sometimes that can get confusing, especially in the Western culture. Is I think that there are some Christians or churches who kind of want to get away from that, or don't appreciate that as much. um and I think that we need this balance of like, no, God created objective beauty. And I mean, so this is not the first time we're going to hear about how amazingly beautiful Sarah is. Okay, it's going to happen over and over again in this book, and then also in the book of Esther we're going to hear how insanely beautiful Esther was. And so this is objective beauty, and this is a blessing from God. It's not a negative thing. Now, I mean, as we get into the book of Ecclesiastes when it talks about vanity, right?
right.
So, like, I think that you need to just keep your perspective of appreciating beauty within this a certain spectrum, right? I mean, don't go to the one spectrum and say that beauties doesn't matter. It's not, God doesn't get caught up in that stuff. All that. Well, God created objective beauty. So, but also don't go on the vain side, on the vanity side of things where, you know what I'm saying? You're focusing on, you're not focusing on any of the right things, or you're not glorifying God for the right reasons, or, you know,
Right. And you're just talking about one attribute, right? I
exactly.
think you're talking, I mean, obviously there's some people are smart, inherently smarter than other people. Some people were born with more gifts that way. Some people were born with maybe being more beautiful or handsome like yourself. And the rest of us guys have to live up to your objective beauty. Um, I'm a
No,
big, I'm,
we're only talking about the ladies right now.
I'm actually a fan of subjective beauty, and all my bros out there, you know what I'm talking about. Because when subjective beauty exists, we have more of a chance.
Yeah.
So no, but uh, your discussion on objective beauty, really, it's just one particular attribute, and really, God, you know, if you're a beautiful person, I wouldn't know anything about that, but maybe Jesse, you could tell us more what it's like.
No,
Uh,
I would just say no, but when I say objective beauty, I'm not just talking. So right now, the topic came up with Sarai, but objective beauty is also, like I said when I first brought it up about philosophy and art and things like that. Like there are like paintings, right?
You're talking about like objective truths, right? You know, you're, and the whole world is not just this subjective place where everyone has a relative truth. I think that's
It,
what you're kind of getting at.
Well, definitely, I think that those tie in together, but I think that there still is objective beauty in a sense of like going beyond just the physical appearance of people, like art, or even like when God created our world. And if you've ever like gone hiking in the mountains, or like, one of the things I think that if you're ever driving through the mountains early in the morning, and there's kind of this cloud and this mist and the
Mountain
sun's riding.
Dew.
Right. Yeah. And there's this breathtakingness that can happen, and that's subjective beauty. Like God created so many different things that are objectively beautiful, not just the certain women, right, that we're reading about in the Bible. I'm just saying that it goes beyond that. And so that still ties into the philosophical like aspect of, if this is all random, how is, looking off a mountaintop to these valleys and the trees, how is that so objectively beautiful and breathtaking, right? Like only a creator could make something like that. And then paintings, though, because God made us in his image, and so we have the ability to be creative too. And so like, um there's paintings throughout history, that, so I haven't been to a lot of fancy art museums, but I've had professors who have, and they've talked about how there are certain paintings when you're going through the Louvre or whatever it is in Paris or other art museums, that like there are these paintings like, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. I had a professor who saw that in person, and he said that,
He
you know
cried.
well, I don't remember that, but he was just saying that like as they turn the corner to go to see Vincent van Gogh, everyone just walked up and was standing there silently, right? And it's not like you need to be,
Crying. Silent. Silently
well, well,
crying.
well, the idea is that everyone like saw it, it was just breathtaking. It was
They
objectively,
couldn't breathe.
yeah, exactly. So I think you know what I'm saying.
Paramedics were standing by.
Yeah.
Nobody was hurt in the creation of this painting.
Yeah.
I
Or
just
the
have one
viewing
more.
of it.
Justin, you seem like a man who knows beauty.
I mean, I know how to give some commentary on a verse talking about
Do you
maybe.
like long walks on the beach at sunset?
I mean, I've never taken one, but I just enjoy walking around outdoors. A long walk on a beach at sunset. I don't know that I've ever done that. Um, but yeah, I just enjoy walking around outdoors.
I just want the bros to know a little bit more about you.
Okay.
Because that might be a bit a moment to capture some some beauty.
Yeah,
Um,
you're right. It would be. I agree. It would be.
right. Just so everybody knows, my bros and brosophines, the reason why Justin's on this Two Bros Bible study is because of his objective beauty. And we're trying to get more clicks by the ladies, the lady bros. Comment below. Listen, if you think Justin's a beautiful man, like, subscribe, comment below, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a moment of this man's beauty.
No,
Um,
no. See, I remember before we started our, or right before we started our lesson today, Henry put on this new fresh black shirt, and it is just working. Henry,
oh
you are
man,
objectively beautiful today.
thank you. You know, listen, I understand subjective beauty is something that I hold very dear. So when you start talking about objective beauty,
I
you're
would say that
ruffling my feathers.
objective beauty and subjective beauty can both exist at the same time, but
Ah,
it's where you say objective beauty doesn't
backpedaling,
exist.
backpedaling. Okay.
Nope. Clarification.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, thank you, my beautiful bro. Um,
You're welcome, my beautiful bro.
all right.
So we're in verse 17, unless you had any other thoughts on this
Comments of
section.
how beautiful you are. We don't have to move on so fast.
Okay.
we we can camp out here for longer if we need. Uh, okay. All right. Please say that you are my sister. I will just say this: lying. Um, we've actually had long conversations, not while taking long walks on the beach, just long conversations about when it's appropriate to lie,
Yeah.
right? And I think there's a situation here where Abram, uh, he was ultimately lying so that he wasn't going to die, and that's a very interesting topic in and of itself. Justin, you've done a little bit of research on this. what has been your conclusion based upon your in-depth study of lying in the Bible? Because you
Yeah,
just don't. This isn't the first time you'll see someone lie. I
yeah,
mean,
great
first
question.
off, the snake, Satan, lied at the beginning of Genesis, and so that was really the first lie. But
Yeah, I
this is
would
the
say that.
second lie, I believe.
Yeah, that's I wasn't counting, but you're right. It seems like it.
This is
So
number two.
numero dos. uh, so I would say that this lie appears to be a sin to me, because this lie ended up getting. Uh, this lie would end up compromising the sanctity of marriage, right? And so this is kind of one of those things where Pharaoh ended up taking Sarai as if he was going to make her his wife, and that's we haven't gotten to that part yet of how God responds, but God doesn't like that, and so it definitely I think that man, I have a
Most
negative view.
situations, you would say that lying is
It
the
is
wrong way to go.
it is, and so
Probably 99 or 999 times out of 1,000.
right, but I also view this as a sin because this is kind of Abraham's protecting himself and not necessarily his wife, right? So that's not what I view. God gave that's not what I believe God called husbands to do in their marriages. I believe that God called husbands to protect their wives at the risk of their own safety, and that's not what Abram's doing here, right? He's protecting himself, his own safety, and risking his wife, or just whatever. Not that she would die, but that uh, you know what I'm saying, that this isn't good. This isn't good the way he's risking her, and so that this is, I view this as a sin. The area that you're referring to, that I would say is where it gets fuzzy or different, is we're actually, when we get to the book of Exodus, we'll talk more about it. But when when the people, the Israelites, were living in the land of Egypt later on, when Moses, around the time Moses was born, Pharaoh had told the Egyptian women who were helping the Israelite women have babies. He had told them, "Hey, kill all the male babies. We need to cut down on the population." And what happened in that sense is you have what they called the Egyptian midwives, the women who were helping, once again, the Hebrew women have the babies, or during the birthing process,
Basically, like little nurses.
like nurses. You're right, great nurses, who what they did is they knew that what Pharaoh had told them to do was wrong. So these women refused to kill these Hebrew boys, these babies, and then they lied to Pharaoh and said, "Hey, look," because he could tell that there keep being a lot of babies born, and they're like, "Look, these Hebrew women are hardcore. They're having the babies and everything before we can even get there." Right. And so they lied, and it was explicit in the book of Exodus. They lied, and then God blessed them for that. Right. So it's not the act of the lie that God was so happy about or blessed them for. It was the act of preserving human life.
Right.
Right. And so look, I mean, I'm sure many of us have read stories about what happened in Nazi Germany, when they were trying to kill Jews, and there was this underground resistance and things like that. And I've read stories where people lied to protect Jews or other people, that were the Nazis were trying to kill. And absolutely, that was what you should do. You should. Yeah, I look, I don't believe Nazis are going to ever resurface, but in that situation where a Nazi asks you, are there Jews here or there, and you say no in order to save lives, you should absolutely do that, you know. And so that's not a sin, because the motive behind it was the preservation of human life. It's not, a lot of times, most of the time when we lie, it's the selfish motive, right? It's not this, how can I prevent a whole lot of people from dying, and though those are different. And so that's, I guess that addresses your question about lying and sin, and just kind of the trickiness of it.
Right. I would just reiterate, I agree. Most of the time, I think whenever we are considering lying, it's really for self-preservation and not to save other people's lives.
Or
So,
just selfishness in general, right? Just that's how I see it.
right.
Selfishness.
Selfishness in general, yes. One more thing to point out here, actually. It's really important. So, Abram, this is a tricky verse in a sense. Justin, can you read verse 13?
Yes, I can. Please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you.
Now, is Abram technically lying here?
Yeah, so this was his half sister. Yeah, he is lying because you're going to say later this was his half sister, and so he wasn't lying. But the deception, like sometimes you can phrase words in certain ways that that you're like, hey, I didn't technically lie here, but based on the way that you phrased it, the person is going to interpret it in a totally untrue way, right? That. And when you know that and you phrase it a way that they're going to interpret it in a completely untrue way, that is lying. Yeah.
Misleading at the very least.
Yeah. And misleading is lying's evil cousin. No, I don't know. I would say that misleading is not good either. I would say that being misleading, lying for selfish gain is still a sin.
That's right. When you see an advertisement on TV and it tells you something and you read the fine print and you're like, "Oh, that's what that says. That's not exactly what I just read," So you can
Yeah,
feel a little bit misled. No one likes
right.
to be misled.
Like when those Skechers shoes promise to give you a better butt and they don't.
You know, I don't own any of those shoes. What are you wearing right now? Are you
I'm not wearing any shoes.
okay? Verse 17. But the Lord, wait, is this your turn?
Sure, yeah. So verse 17, but the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away, and his wife, and all that belonged to him.
Whoa, okay. There is some very interesting stuff here. So God is clearly not happy about the situation here and struck Pharaoh with some great plagues. Now, the word here is great, which this isn't your average run of the mill regular plague. This sounds like something that is not good, very not good, to say the
Not good.
least.
Yep.
um, I think Pharaoh has the right to be upset here
Yeah.
because Abram totally screwed up part of Pharaoh's life at the very least. And Pharaoh calls him out on this.
Yep.
Pharaoh tells Abraham, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she, Sarai, was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." So it appears here that Pharaoh took Sarai as his wife.
So here's what I don't know though to the degree, like, did he take her and put her kind of in this whole almost like an engagement type
Engagement holding chamber.
engagement holding chamber? Or did he actually take her, go through like a ceremony to make her his wife? So that's what I don't know. Which one was it? I don't know. Um, I don't think there's enough information there.
Are you asking
But
whether they consummated the marriage or not, basically?
I wasn't going to say it, but you did.
Well, we're all
So,
adults here, so
yeah.
at
We're all
least
bros
at
here.
least one of us is an adult bro on here.
Yeah, yeah.
Age
So,
before beauty.
yeah. No, so the idea though, but either way, here's the conclusion that I would draw from this passage is that how serious the seriousness of marriage to God and the sanctity of marriage to God, and that the how adultery is something that God hates, and that so that is something that I think we can take with some concrete understanding here.
Agreed. And I'm also shocked that Abram let it go this far.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, and that's why I think it's clear that it was a sin what he did here.
This could have been one of those slippery slope situations where you start off with a lie, then the lie just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you got a huge mess on your hands.
Yep.
So, it's a bit self-serving from Abram as well, because if you see, Abram's getting a lot out of this.
Yep.
He's getting sheep, oxen, donkeys, male and female servants, camels.
Yep.
I mean, so yeah, that's a bit, Abram, I'm not super proud of Abram in this situation. He goes from being this super epic guy who leaves his homeland and then, immediately gets into this type of mess, which I think makes Abram very relatable. Abram wasn't a perfect
Yeah.
person.
Right.
He made mistakes. And at the
Yep.
very end of this chapter, what we see Abram and his wife, and they escort them away and everything that had belonged to them. And at this point, it seems that what belonged to them is, not only Abram and his wife in that group, but what belonged to them was ultimately sheep, oxen, donkeys, servants, camels. So, Abram, he got something out of all this. That can sound like a good thing, but as you mentioned earlier, sometimes you get all this stuff, it's not actually a good thing.
I agree.
You give someone who's not putting God first in their life, you give them $1 million, is that going to make them a better person? Is that really going to make them happier? I think I like the saying that the only people that know that money won't make you happy are wealthy people. Wealthy people, they have the money and they know that that money won't make you happy. And everybody else who doesn't have money looks to those wealthy people and say, oh, if I only had all this money or I only had all these things, then I would be happy. When in reality, that's an illusion. That's an illusion, right? They're disillusioned into thinking that. So that's the first point that I would make. The second point is, who's to say God wouldn't have blessed them with all that stuff anyways if Abram would have stayed faithful to begin with? Maybe he would have been blessed more. I think the perfect analogy to this is whenever you see one of these crazy successful criminals, these famous criminals that you see in a documentary, and you're like, man, this criminal, he's a hardworking guy. I mean, he's working all the time. He's, successful. If he just applied that exact same work ethic and that exact same managerial skills and that exact same intelligence to a normal job, not only would he have gotten everything that materially that he'd want anyways, but he'd also not have to go to jail. And so, yeah, I definitely do think this section is extremely interesting. I'm super excited that we're messing around with Abram right now. We are flying through the Bible right now.
Yes,
Genesis 12.
I agree, Henry. I wanted to piggyback on something you just said. It reminded me of something I had heard in a church or in a sermon years ago. So even to back up what you said from a real life example, someone who does not share our worldview, There's a quote here, and you can look it up for yourself. It appears to come from February 28th, 2017, where Jim Carrey, the famous actor, said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." And so this is not some
It's not some Christian
Christian,
guy, yeah.
yeah, it's not some Christian theologian we're quoting to support our own view. This is someone that you remarked to earlier who has millions of dollars, fame, and everything, and realizes it's not the answer. And that's what certain books of the Bible, certain parts of the Bible say. And talking about Romans, the book of Romans, God has set eternity in our hearts, and so like there's this discontentment. Like if we don't have a relationship with God, that money, fame, whatever it is, can never fill. And so only God can take care of that.
Love it. Quoting Jim Carrey in the Bible.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
episode, I feel like we should end this episode with more Jim Carrey quotes. Like,
Alrighty then.
alrighty then. Um, yeah. Anyways, I'm excited to be. We're in the second half again. This is the first chapter of the second half. We're gonna be plowing right through on, and Genesis only has 50 chapters in it. So 12 through 50 are the second half of all this, and I'm really excited. Bros, have a brotastic bro day, and we will bro you later.
See you, broskies.